All dogs go to heaven. This is the next part of my Don Bluth series. I actually forgot this movie existed, and I actually went and watched Rockadoodle, and then I realized, wait, this movie actually came before that. So I've seen now both of them, and yeah, I'm glad I did that because these movies kind of have an intertwined story where after Don had left Spielberg's Amblimation to go to Goldcrest, because I think the story goes he wanted more control over his films and Spielberg was a little bit more controlling, which I think was probably for the best because Steven Spielberg has the money to make these things work. You know, Land Before Time and American Tail are his probably in his top three best movies. I mean, Secret Invasion's fantastic, but these other two are really strong contenders. Might even be better in some ways, even though Secret Invasion I think is overall the better movie. And so when he went to Goldcrest to make these movies, problems arose. And we'll talk about that more with Rockadoodle, but it definitely affects this movie. I saw this one as a kid. I think my mom or somebody had nostalgia for this one and they showed me it. And I remember liking it. I remember there also being a sequel to it that I saw, which in my Blu-ray set, here. Let me show you the Blu-ray set I have. It's a MGM Family Collection. It has like all these movies you see on the front. You know, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, Secret of Nim, Pebble and the Penguin. All those gonna have 1 and 2. Igor. Very random assortment of movies. They're just all family movies. That's the only reason. And even some of them like I wouldn't show these to kids because if they get bored, like, why would any kid want to watch the greatest story ever told? This, like, 3 hour, very boring epic about Jesus. But, yeah, I don't know. It's, so I have that. I probably might rewatch it just for fun. I may not, though. But this movie's interesting because, in a way, it was better and worse than I remember. This movie is a lot more fun than I remember. And that is definitely a pro of this movie. It's really fun. And I liked a lot of the voice acting, especially for Itchy. Itchy's voice actor does a great job. And stuff like that. The animation is gorgeous. A lot better than I remember. Really pretty. Especially in some of the, like that hell sequence almost. Dream he's having. And some other, the moments when he's going into heavens. But especially on the facial expressions on our villain Scarface, who's a great villain. But I think the problem with this movie is this is a very disjointed movie. Like if I describe the plot to you of this movie, basically Scarface wants to kill Charlie, and then in like the first 10 minutes of the movie, he kills Charlie. Charlie goes to heaven, decides, hey, look, there's a mistake. I was killed by this dude. I want to go back. And so he goes back, realizing, hey, I can never go back to Earth, or not to Earth, to heaven, which is a very horrific concept. Like, hey, you decided to go back to Earth, but as a consequence, you can never go back to heaven. Very horrific sequence. Yet it's rarely touched upon in the movie, and there's not really any thought to it. And then from there, Charlie sneaks around, finds this girl. She can talk to animals. They start betting on animals, and then Scarface tries to kill him, but he can't kill him because now he's immortal because of the heaven thing. And then there's like they save the girl, and the girl gets a new family, and then Charlie is able to go back to heaven because he did a good deed or whatever. It's like it's very disjointed. A lot of the logic in the movie doesn't always flow the best. Like for example, like how does Scarface learn he's alive? I don't know, but he just finds out, I guess. I like it feels like maybe there should have been a scene of him realizing that maybe. It's just kind of implied that he knew because the club being popular that Charlie opened up with the money that they were using to bet on the horses, but it's kind of weird. There's like just a lot of like sequences where like the logic and how we got there are just a little bit. I know there is an extended cut where they cut a couple deleted scenes that were a little too dark, and that was a Goldcrest decision, not a Don Bluth decision, from what I understand. Um, but this being a kids movie, I understand that because it is kind of dark. This movie is about someone being murdered and then going back to Earth with the caveat he may never end up going back to heaven. It's a lot to put on a kid, so I get maybe cutting down some of these sequences. It's a very weird kids movie, honestly. But so I don't know. This movie didn't really work. Some of the songs are some of like Don Bluth's most forgettable, and really this movie is both seen as the beginning and end of Don Bluth, or the beginning of Don Bluth's golden era, and then the beginning of the end. And I can kind of say that because I think this is definitely the end of the golden era where I think if you watch these four movies, they're all pretty solid movies, including this one. While this one has problems, it's still a very fun, entertaining movie. It's not one I'm going to rewatch or think about as much as the others. But that's just because this one doesn't really have the substance that the other ones have. Like Secret of NIMH has a lot of intelligent ideas and themes to it. It's got some political ideas in there, some ideas about science and technology and, things like that, and ideas presented within that film. You got, American Tail, which is a lot of themes of like immigration and communism and other things, and political satires of political figures at the time in the movie, things like that. And then you have Land Before Time, which, it is mostly just a fun dinosaur movie with these kids going on a journey, but there's also some subtext of how, prejudice is indoctrinated into our children, and and how kids interpret that, and how we can grow out of that, and things like that. There's a lot of ideas in these films. This movie really doesn't have a lot of that, and maybe it does to some extent, but because the movie is so jumbled, it doesn't really have time to go through any of that. And so, yeah, another thing I want to mention is the score to this movie is really good. Just wanted to mention that. And the last thing I want to mention, this is a very famous part of this movie, and probably if you know about this movie, it's only from this sequence because this has become so famous now. The big lip alligator moment. If you don't know, there's a YouTuber on YouTube, and this is the last time I'll probably ever bring him up in a video because I fucked this guy. Doug Walker is a famous YouTube critic. He's famous for like the Nostalgia Critic, and he came up with this joke on his channel called Big Lip Alligator Moments, which is basically a moment like in this movie where this giant alligator comes out of nowhere and sings a song, and it's not really story relevant, doesn't really have a point, kind of comes out of nowhere, and that's something that he became a running joke, and he uses as like a phrase for movies that have similar scenes to that. And it's absolutely a thing here. It's very weird. I'm not really sure. Honestly, overall, this movie's weird. This movie was a box office failure, unlike his last two movies. Man, Don Bluth could really not catch a break. But this movie did not do great. But luckily, it did well on home video, so they did make a sequel. It did actually get a TV show, which I've never seen. I've seen the sequel, don't remember anything about it, except I think there's like a devil dog in it, and Scarface steals some horn or something. I don't know. And then there's the Christmas Carol special that they did too. So All Dogs Go to Heaven was kind of a franchise, but it still was not enough to save this movie. Unfortunately, it is not great. Yeah, I think this movie has quite a bit of issues, but overall, I would say if you are a fan of Don Bluth, it is worth watching. It's a fun movie still. I think if you watch it with your kids, maybe watch it with them if they're sensitive, because there's some darker scenes in it, but it's still a fun movie. And I would recommend it. I just think that, this is not one of his greats, and is the start of the end. I mean, literally, like, I'm telling you right now, the next 3 or 4 movies are gonna be bad, so we'll get there when we get there, but it's not going to be pretty.